Hey everyone, Laszlo Montgomery here on a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles. And to start this day right, I have the distinct honor, I'm even going to use the R word, 荣幸, to have on this long running family program the venerable and veritable Kaiser Kuo. Welcome to the CHP, Kaiser. So, who doesn't know you? We could skip the intro to Kaiser Kuo. ChatGPT had this to say about you. Kaiser has been a prominent figure in bridging cultural gaps and promoting understanding between China and the West, and has also been associated with various projects and initiatives aimed at fostering cross cultural communication. Hey, what do you think? Enough said. That describes you pretty
Sure.
well.
Nothing too bad in there.
Yeah, nothing. No, there was nothing bad in there at all. So, anyway, both of us have our 14-year anniversaries coming up. You and Jeremy
Oh
for
yeah.
Seneca, and me in June 2010 with the China History Podcast, and Eric and Kobus too with the China Global
Yeah.
South Project. So I think it was back in 2014, sometime on one of my Beijing trips, that you guys invited me on Seneca, and I had my big moment. And I remember thinking, when I sat down in that guest chair, oh boy, I'm really in the podcasting business now. And I remember that room at David Lancashire's crib, Pop Up Chinese
Oh yeah.
Studios. That was too funny. I have to admit, I was starstruck being around you
Oh come on,
guys.
come on. Pizza,
Yeah.
pizza.
and after the recording, we all went out to eat somewhere, or Jeremy took us. You didn't make it. And then we came over to your place afterwards, and it was already quite late. And someone brought a bottle of something, and we all hung out. And David Moser was
Yeah.
there, and you played the guitar riff for me from Lieren. What a fun night that
Yeah,
was.
I've always meant to do that in a live show, to bring an acoustic guitar and actually play that.
And I'll never forget when we were all hanging out at your place. You took me into your office, and it was just filled with history books. I mean, it was like a scholar's library. And I knew you were a true lover of China history. And I've listened to you over the years on Seneca, and you always had an insightful comment whenever past history was, relevant to a current topic. So that's why I reached out to you, invited you on. And so you just got back from Europe and you raved about Austria. I've been dying to go there since forever. How was the
Oh, it was
trip?
amazing. I was invited to take part in something called the Salzburg Global Seminar, and it was actually held at the Schloss, at the mansion where The Sound of Music was shot. And I kind of had a standing challenge to all the participants to work in some Sound of Music reference. So I think mine was, as I was moderating the opening panel, I said something like, "The halls are alive with the sound of rational China discourse." Anyway, but I mean, Rohier Kramer's, he really he just outdid everyone. He had like three in one session. It was amazing. Anyway, a lot of my favorite historians and thinkers were there. There was Rana Mitter, Arne Vestad, Isa Ding, Rohier, who I just mentioned. Lots of just really smart practitioners like Amy Selico, who was in government, and Paul Triolo, also, former government person, and just, a bunch of smart Europeans. You don't hear enough from, the European side of things. And some of my favorite young Chinese public intellectuals like Zichun Wang, who writes the amazing Peking Knowledge Substack. Yeah, so it was a great gathering. But I guess after Salzburg, four of us went down to Vienna, and that was really amazing. I mean, it just reminded me actually, weirdly, of Beijing. And when I said that, people were like, "What? What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, there's these wide boulevards, and there's this sort of sense of imperium, of sort of, it was an imperial capital, and it really feels like it. There's this sort of this, gravitas to the whole place, and." Yeah, so I totally dig it. I went to the military museum, spent a couple of good hours there, and given that I've had this fixation with the Habsburgs and with the 30 Years' War for like the last couple of years, it was just, incredibly satisfying. I'm also really into Asian archery, and it was just great to see all these Ottoman bows and all this kit, quivers and arrows, all stuff from the 1648, from the siege of Vienna. Oh wait, 1640, whatever.
And
All this stuff from the siege of Vienna. What is that? I can't remember. Suddenly I'm forgetting. Some historian.
Any Mozart close encounters?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Mozart's, family home. You sort of have to do that in Salzburg, and we ate in a restaurant in a place where he had lived. Apparently, everything claims some kind of connection in Salzburg to him. And there's, a statue of Mozart in Vienna. He went there, when he was a young man. Spent a lot of his life in Vienna. So yeah, Mozart everywhere.
Huh. So you've had so many of these China scholars on Seneca. Who are the ones that stand out as the Fairbankses and Spences of our day? Not just in academia and all the think tanks, but plain old individuals, like Alec Ash, Paul French, Peter Hessler. And so many of these guys have been on Seneca.
Yeah. You've just named three of my favorite people. Yeah, I just love to talk to people who have profound ideas, people who are just willing to, take chances and make some pretty bold claims, even when sometimes the reach exceeds the grasp. I'm thinking of folks like Yasheng Huang, for example. He was on the show fairly recently. He has this fascinating, if somewhat controversial, book out called "The Rise and Fall of the East." East being an acronym. So he was really fun to talk to. He's a serious mind. One person I bring up a lot when I ask this question is somebody who not a lot of people in the China field know, because she doesn't actually work on China. She's a lawyer who's written a great book on globalization. It's called The Six Faces of Globalization. If you listen to the show that I did with her and her co-author, Nicholas Lamp, you'd see why I admire her so much as a thinker. Her name is Anthea Roberts, and she's just doing some really amazing, groundbreaking work in what she calls think tech, just wedding her very interesting way of analyzing narratives and analyzing the way that people think, wedding that to artificial intelligence in fascinating ways. I guess, like, for greats of our time, I couldn't leave Robert Daly off the list. I don't know if you know who he is, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's just another person.
Haven't heard from him a lot
Yeah,
lately.
you should. I mean, we should hear from him. I mean, he had a big interview in The Wire. I did a really long session with him on Seneca before we had our little hiatus. He is just somebody who has this incredibly broad, encompassing worldview and just brings, genuine wisdom to conversations about China. We had a talk about morality and U.S.-China policy, which I thought was great. You mentioned Peter Hessler. I absolutely adore him. You probably know that I think he's my favorite writer, period, nonfiction anyway. I enjoy reading him, not just for his amazing prose, but also just he brings this decency and this fairness and this deep empathy. It's just manifest in every bit of his writing. And so, yeah. As for who's the Spence of our time, gosh, I guess I'm thinking it might be Stephen Platt. I mean, he was actually a student of Spence's at Yale. He wrote Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom and Imperial Twilight. And so if you're looking for a writer who I think combines sort of, big ideas about China, just a fluency in historical detail, but also just an amazing capacity to tell a fantastic story, I think Stephen Platt. I think he's a young guy, so he's got a ton of books left in him. I'm going to snap up anything that he writes.
Yeah, he's great. I used his book for my Taiping Rebellion series.
Yeah. Actually, it's better than Spence's, right? I actually like Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom better than God's Chinese Son. Sacrilege.
Yeah. I just finished the Peter Hessler interview you did on Seneca. Yeah, just finished that one yesterday.
Yeah, the Egypt-China one, yeah.
Took it in over a couple of days. You've had so many great history-related Seneca shows over the past 14 years. Do any, for you, stand out as among the most memorable?
Yeah, for sure. I think, like, Jing Tsu, who is a professor at Yale, she's actually, I suppose she's an historian. I mean, her field is language. She wrote this fantastic book called Kingdom of Characters. I don't know if you've read that, but it is a history. It's basically a history of how the Chinese language was sort of made fit for purpose for the modern world, because of its peculiar orthography and everything. It was pretty hard to make it type, right. It was hard to do telegraphy with it. It was hard to do word processing and eventually input on phones and stuff like that. So it's sort of the whole history of that. And I joked with her. It's called Kingdom of Characters, but I don't think she was just talking about the Chinese characters. The characters who she hangs the story on are themselves just fascinating people. It's like this perfect little vehicle to tell the story of modern China through the modernization of the Chinese language. So it's great. I don't know. Jeff Bader is somebody who I had on before he passed, which was just toward the end of last year, and very, very sad. He was with the Biden administration. Yeah. It wasn't a history show, although we did go into sort of the history of the souring of U.S.-China relations. And he hit really hard on the Biden administration's policy. He served in the Obama administration on the National Security Council. Another former diplomat or somebody else with a lot of government experience I've always enjoyed having on is Susan Thornton, who was the acting Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia Pacific, actually under the Trump administration of all things. But she's not a political appointee, obviously. She did a couple of shows with me, but one that was really memorable was just on the indispensable nature of diplomacy in the times we're in right now. And
I remember that one.
But she's fantastic. Jude Blanchett, all the shows I've done with him. So we did one on looking at the period of the 80s and sort of the conservative resistance to reform. That was fascinating. He did a book about that. I think it was called something like China's New Red Guards or something like that. But she's great. Jude's great. Jude he actually did a show with me, if I remember, where he hit really, really hard and called out the moral panic that we're in. It was right after the televised hearing of Mike Gallagher's select committee on the U.S. competition with the Chinese Communist Party. It was great. Yeah, he was a perennial favorite.
Yeah, I like Pekingology, his show. Whenever that drops, I always listen.
It's great, yeah.
If you wanted to turn someone on to China history, what do you think would hook them? What events or periods might appeal to the broadest possible range of listeners? What kind of compilation package of the greatest hits from Chinese history would be included?
You mean besides the China History podcast?
Besides that one.
No, that's where I would start. Good. That's a good question. I guess it would depend on who they are. I mean, if it's like a kid who, like me, was romancing on medieval fantasy and such, I'd go straight to like the Chuhan Contention or the Three Kingdoms, or like the Song Liao Jin period. If they're drawn, I mean, like I am also, to periods of intellectual foment, to change and to revolution and all that, battle of big ideas. Obviously, late 19th and early 20th century up through the 1920s. I mean, I don't think there's a period in Chinese history that I would say is remotely boring. But I guess my mixtape would have to include all of the above, plus a ton of Tang Dynasty, the band, and the actual dynasty,
course.
And the Ming and Qing. I guess that would be my greatest hits.
Yeah, there's so much to choose from.
Oh yeah.
I've often heard the term so-called century of humiliation, or what China calls their century of humiliation.
Oh God.
This kind of framing, I think, tends to try and diminish some of the more egregious acts committed on the Chinese people. So granted that the party has sort of grabbed hold of this narrative and turned it into a crusade, but that aside, what do you think about the acts committed by foreigners in China between 1839 and 1949? Will the perpetrators ever live this down?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I also agree with you. I hate that framing. I think it's really insulting. I mean, to me, it'd be like saying, the so-called Jim Crow era, or what Black Americans call the slavery period. Yeah, the implication, of course, being that you should get over it, right? That's just it's insane. I mean, the party milks it and has milked it, too much for my liking, for sure. But that does not mean that they created this idea out of whole cloth. I mean, you got to remember, like Chiang Kai-shek wrote "Avenge humiliation" in his diary every damn day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this isn't something that's peculiar to the party. I mean, yeah. So when you ask, what do I think about the acts committed by foreigners? I mean, look, there was some terrible, terrible stuff that happened. I mean, everything. I mean, the foreigners isn't just the West; it's also their very talented pupil, Japan, right? So yeah, I mean, if we're talking about everything from the sacking of the old Summer Palace to the rape of Nanjing and Unit 731, then yeah, I mean, it's what can you say? It was absolutely terrible. I think the important thing is just to really focus in on what are the lessons that China has learned from this century of humiliation, right? I mean, I think we need to understand that. We need to keep that firmly in mind when we think what China wants now, right? What does it want? It will never again allow itself to be the technological and industrial and military inferior of predatory foreign powers, right? It really will never allow itself to be that. I mean, the whole project of the last 180 years has been around, restoration of China's dignity, its place in the world, right? And if you don't get that the grievance was real, you'll not really, you can't make sense of what China's trying to do today.
So, talking about Japan, if Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, if he flew to Beijing, got down on his knees and issued an unreserved apology for all the atrocities Japan committed in China between the Mukden incident and the end of World War II, would that put an end to this enmity that exists in the PRC against Japan?
Well, it's funny. I've actually run exactly that same thought experiment with just a bunch of my Chinese friends. I gotta see. I mean, at least they were honest, right? I mean, there certainly have been outliers. They tend to be the real, Japanophiles, and they actually would go further than just accepting such an apology. They would say that actually Japan's done enough, that it's not the same country it was before 1945. They know that Mao never even wanted an apology. He dismissed the idea. I mean, I think of my dad, who told me when I was a young kid, he said, "You have to understand, Kaiser, when I was your age, I would have, without hesitation, wrapped myself in explosives, rolled under a Japanese tank, and pulled the plug on it, pulled the pin of a grenade." The hatred was amazing, but by 1972, he was driving a bright orange Datsun 240Z and was, extolling the virtues of Japanese cars, and he had lots of Japanese friends, and yeah, so I think the forgiveness is possible. Look, most of my friends who have asked this, they'll say something like, "Hey, maybe if all the textbooks actually owned Japanese atrocities and had a chapter on the rape of Nanjing, had a chapter on, the atrocities of Unit 731, then maybe we'd be cool." I mean, what they're looking for, I think, is national contrition, right? And most of them would say, like Germany did, they want monuments to Japan, not, the Yasukuni Shrine, where the Class A war criminals are interred, but, shrines to comfort women, shrines to enslaved peoples, to the victims of this war, right? So I get it, but again, it's one of these things where you can't separate it entirely from the fact that the party, for its own political purposes, has milked it. I mean, I used to say all the time, they stand still over that kind of fire pit of anti-Japanese nationalism with a fan in one hand and a fire hose in the other. They can flame it. They can just spark it up and make it make the flames rise whenever they want. But if it threatens to burn down the surrounding countryside, they can hose it down too, right?
Well, as far as pre Qing Dynasty history, is there any period that you find very underrated where, so much consequential stuff happened? The periods of disunity, I don't know, for me anyway, they often get lost in the shuffle between the Han, Tang, Yuan, Ming, and
Oh,
Qing.
totally, totally, totally. Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I think you put your finger right on it. It's the years of after the collapse of the Han Dynasty, formally in 220, but even before that. Look, everyone knows the Three Kingdoms period, right? Everyone is. I think we've kind of gotten all at some point or another completely obsessed with that period, but it's really hard to find somebody, anybody who can really recount, even in kind of broad strokes, the six dynasties in the south, or the 16 kingdoms, the five barbarians in the north, right? All the way up until the Sui reunification. I think it's for them, it's just as much of a mess as the Warring States period, say before 420 or something, right? It's just too much of too much chaos to take in. I mean, I've only bought one volume of the Cambridge history because it's super super expensive, but the one that I bought was on the
Hmm.
era of division, because that's what I felt like that's my great weakness, and it's amazing. I mean, it's just an absolutely amazing and really really rich period to study. But you also mentioned there's shorter periods, right, between the Tang and the Song. You have the five dynasties and 10 kingdoms, right? That's only what 907 to 960, so it's only what 53 years, and even that, it's like crazily
Yeah.
difficult to remember everything. I mean, to even know the order of those five dynasties, to commit that to memory. But obviously, I mean, like if you buy the Naito hypothesis, right, this is an incredibly important period, the economic and social transformation of China. So yeah, I think those periods of disunity are totally, as you say, underrated. And even there's just like sort of the neat. So Jay Carter writes a fantastic column. He wrote it for the China Project, and now he writes it on my Sinica Substack. And one that he did last week was about the Manchu conquest of China. It was about the Shangtan massacre of 1649. But we don't know. We have this notion somehow that the Ming, Li Zicheng took out the Ming, the Manchus came in through Sanhaiguan and mopped up, and then suddenly we're enjoying the fruits of the Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong periods. It was really messy. It was really bloody. We don't really study that very much. That's a fascinating period.
Listen, if you need more Cambridge history of China, I have archive.org. It's got most of them. I got like downloads of probably about 15 volumes.
Wow, dude.
Yeah,
Okay, you're on. Yeah. I mean, I have this. Yeah, I kind of like to read the hard copy of it, but sitting on my, my,
me
but
too.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, nothing like the hard copy. You're probably more on top of this than I am. How widespread do you think the teaching of Chinese history is across America in the K through 12 curriculum? I had one semester of China combined with Japan and Africa in my seventh grade social studies class, but I don't recall ever learning anything about China when I went through the regimen between 1965 and 1977.
Yeah, I mean,
Is anybody teaching it?
so I've actually spoken for a couple of organizations that work specifically on teaching, Asian history, that train historian, teachers at the middle school and high school level, for example. One of them is the 1990 Institute, which is headquartered out in California, and another is an organization that's run out of Colorado, out of the University of Colorado at Boulder, and they were both pretty clear that it's just awful right now. I mean, so I've looked at the AP World History courses, they teach in high schools. They give very short shrift to China. If you actually look at the College Board exams themselves and the descriptions, it would appear that there's quite a bit that students are actually expected to know. But I think, Laszlo, as you would guess, everything is still very Eurocentric. It's shifted obviously in recent years, but not, it's shifted toward, I think toward the global South, which is laudable, very good. I'm glad that they're doing it. Much more African history, much more Latin American history, but I don't think that there's been a sort of a commensurate boost in the importance laid on East Asian history, which I think is if I wanted to pivot to Asia, maybe that's where it'd be a good place to start. Now, I mean, I'm a few years behind you. I finished high school in the mid '80s, and honestly, I don't remember anything beyond like seventh grade, like seventh grade social studies class. I had Mr. Whittemore at Emily Gray Junior High in Tucson, Arizona, and he was really cool. He was a big stoner, and we found his bong in the drawer of his desk one day. Anyway, that was a rumor. Anyway, my only memory of the China section, and it's really clear, is that there was a page that for some reason my book would always open up to, where the top half of the page spread across. It was like a panoramic shot of Red Guards in black and white in Tiananmen Square during the height of the Cultural Revolution. So this would be like 78 or 79 for me.
Yeah, it's no secret. The masses of our fellow countrymen aren't well schooled in Chinese history or even U.S. China history. I always tell people at least gain an understanding of China history from the last 150 years. No need to learn about all 5,000 years or however far back it goes. How far back do we have to go in China history? And how much Chinese history and Chinese American history should be taught? And do you think that might possibly temper some of the irrational dislike of China and all the baggage that comes with that?
Yeah, a lot in there. Question. First, I mean, you asked how far back. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you don't have to go all the way back to the Xiaoshang and Zhou. Maybe a warring states unit, maybe something on the Qin and the Han, just to kind of familiarize them with things like the major philosophical schools, right? Legalism, Taoism, Confucianism, and the Kuju exam system. That's very important for them to take on. The basic shape of the Chinese bureaucracy and the state. But yeah, I tell people what you tell them, basically that you get your heads around things that actually shape how Chinese people think and act today. When you don't really need to go that much further back than the mid Qing dynasty. I think start it with hey, what was China like at sort of the last time it was at the height of its splendor, right? So I'd say that geography is probably more important than all that earlier history. You have to understand a lot of the geography is super important. And then really after that, it's just the simple arc of modern history, which actually is pretty simple, right? I mean, it's not that far off from that kind of school narrative that you hear about, China, succumbing to external pressure and internal corruption and, falling into this 100-year period of abject misery and humiliation. And then, the rest of it, obviously, is clearly we understand, how the party then was the salvation of China and probably the rest of mankind too.
Thank God for them.
Yeah, God bless them. But I think that teaching more Chinese history would be good. More Chinese American history would be good. But Laszlo, actually, I have this idea that that's not as important as teaching people how to think about their own history a little better. I think that what we really have to extirpate is this idea that that history behaves in this teleological fashion, that it's directed toward the goal of creating liberal democratic capitalism. That's the end point. Everything is just sort of prelude to that marvelous moment when the Enlightenment happens, right? I really worry that that's kind of still what people come out of their schooling believing, and that leaves them really susceptible to not getting how important contingency is, and not understanding that that's not how history played out in most of the rest of the world, and leaves us not understanding why China is as it is today, why Iran is as it is today, why Russia is, why India or Indonesia or any other, why Mexico is. Because we just don't include it in that Whiggish version of history. And so I think it's actually more important that they have, a more sophisticated grasp on how Western history unfolded. I'd love, as the cherry on top, for them to learn at least recent Chinese history. But I think what I've found is that students I've taught who have already a pretty good grasp of their own history, and who know how to really problematize Western history, when they come to China's history, they're much better at taking it in and at the interpretation and the synthesis.
What do you think the level of awareness is in China about U.S. history? I mean, in outside of the international schools and outside, and inside the urban areas, not in the countryside.
Yeah, no, it's also terrible. I mean, everything that I've just said, I think, is also fully applicable. Look, I mean, you've heard it a million times, right? American history, it's so short. It's contemptibly short. Why should I bother to even? Well, a lot more happened in the last 250 years than in the preceding 2,500, right? I mean, that's why, for one. So yeah, I've had to try to disabuse a lot of my Chinese friends of this notion that somehow their history is superior to Western history, or it's the only one worthy of study. I think that no history should be studied, removed from context, removed from the comparative perspective.
Yeah. What do you think? What inconvenient history still looms large in today's discourse inside and outside of China, as far as China being victimized?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most people with some kind of casual knowledge of China's bruising encounters with the West and with Japan, they know something. They've heard of the Opium War, maybe they've heard of the Second Opium War and the Anglo-French sacking of the of the old Summer Palace. Maybe they know about the Eight Nation Alliance and the suppression of the Boxers. Yeah, and of course they know about Japan, right? But I think both within China and outside of China, everyone gets how impactful these things are, most educated people do. But I think the thing that is often new to people who haven't really studied Chinese history is Versailles, right? It's the massive sense of betrayal that was felt even by like the most ardent supporters of Western liberalism. They don't get how that just in the case of so many individuals, they just sort of took liberal commitments right out at the knees, right? It was just such a body blow. And you can draw a straight line basically from the May 4th protests to the two authoritarian ideologies that then were in contention for the next several decades, right? You can draw a straight line to the authoritarian politics of the KMT or the communists, right? And yeah, it's weird how many people are unaware of how important that was in shaping the direction of politics in China for the entire practically the entire 20th century. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Anyway, watching C-SPAN and listening to some of these nitwits in Congress flapping their gums about China was really, I have to say, it was partially what inspired me to start the CHP back in 2010. These days, the bar is practically buried underground. It's so low, as far as awareness about China's history. But today, is there anyone in government who has a respectable grasp of Chinese history and politics beyond the same old tired talking points? Who is there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd be surprised at my answer. I would say that a lot of them are in the Central Intelligence Agency. I say this not knowing the current crop of people, but I know the people who trained them, and I know a lot of the people who were very, very senior in the agency in previous administrations. And the strangest thing is that on the sort of hawk-dove spectrum, these guys, the more they knew about the worst stuff that China has ever done, the more they tend to be on the dovish side of the spectrum. I'm talking about people who were, heading the Directorate of National Intelligence China desk for years. People, who were writing the president's daily brief, right? These guys are very, very knowledgeable and steeped in the history of China and Chinese language and in the humanities, and they are, pretty uniformly, smart and pretty, I think, enlightened in the policies that they advocate for. So yeah, that's a maybe surprising place to find them. There are people in government in for example, the State Department or it's the NSC also, who are fantastic. I mean, who are highly, highly knowledgeable. I think the problem isn't in the political. I mean, the problem isn't in the career foreign service officers or the people in what Trump likes to call the deep state. The problem is, in political appointees often, or in elected officials in, both houses of Congress, in some of our agents, our major agencies, Treasury and Commerce and things like that, where huge weighty decisions rest on their shoulders, but they are not being made with a lot of historical depth behind them. So yeah, that's unfortunate. But
Yeah, well, geez, nowadays there's just no shortage of just the inanity, just the stupid
yeah,
comments
yeah.
that are just coming out daily and getting out there across the country, around the world, and it's like, oh my God.
It's only going to get worse, Laszlo. It's silly season now. I mean, we are just at the beginning of it right now, and it's just going to crest, as November approaches. It's going to be
Yeah, I
nuts. So
fear.
buckle up, man.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know I could go on and on about this if you just wind me up. But for you, what's so great about Chinese history as opposed to all the other great histories of all the great nations and empires, besides the obvious longevity of Chinese civilization? What is it that's so attractive to so many people like us and for so many others too, going back to the Silk Road?
Yeah, I think part of it is just you said longevity, but it's not just longevity. It's also the continuity of the written language, which makes really, really ancient history quite accessible even to people who are trained in modern stuff. Like from the classical Chinese training I had, I can kind of read a lot of stuff that was written in the 2nd century BC, which is very cool, right? Look, I'll refer to my earlier remarks. I don't think that it's a good idea to say this history is better than that history or this history is more compelling. They're all damn compelling. I mean, I've never encountered anywhere in the world history that doesn't have the ability to utterly fascinate me, right? It's just that I happen to have developed a skill set, that makes this is I don't read Latin or Greek, or maybe I would have been more interested. I don't read cuneiform, right? They're all absolutely fascinating. I think that part of it is there aren't a lot of civilizations around today that have such contiguity with their earlier history, right? A lot of the extant nation states, they can't really, they aren't the such obvious linear descendants of the same people who earlier inhabited that same geography, right? I mean, in some sense, for sure. I mean, and there are certainly exceptions, but nothing with that kind of continuity that China has. And so I think that's the basis of a lot of pride, often of some not so attractive hubris about it. But it's also, I think one of the draws for me, one of the sources of fascination, because, you can explain a lot of what we now see directly in terms of what came before.
Yeah, I just love watching Chinese history come to life. With all these serial dramas, I'm watching Da Qin Di Guo right now,
Oh,
and
cool, cool.
I just love these things, and I just think how they take those words from those dusty old histories and just bring it to life. It just blows me away. I can never get tired of
Yeah,
it.
me neither.
You told me earlier about your paternal grandfather Guo Tingyi, who passed away in 1975. He was the founder of the Institute of Modern History of the Academia Sinica in
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan. And he was also associated with a number of respected universities: Columbia, Tsinghua, Harvard, University of Hawaii. And he was 15 years old when the May 4th movement
That's right.
happened.
That's right.
So, for someone who has a strong interest in Chinese history, that's quite a grandfather to have. Who was your grandfather, Guo Tingyi?
Yeah, so he was a really eminent historian. I mean, that's just full stop. I don't think I've ever met anyone who really cut his teeth on the old school history here in the States who didn't know who he was and whose eyes didn't sort of widen when they realized I was his grandson. Huge shoes to fill. That's why I think I was always, I felt this constant imposter syndrome when I was, a graduate student, thinking, I'm never even going to come close to knowing a fraction of what this man knew. His style too, his writing style is just insanely elegant. It's so great, and it's just so packed with profundity. So he was my lodestar, obviously. I mean, what was great about having him, even though my father was an engineer, it was that history was a legitimate choice for us. I mean, it was like, it was okay to not be a STEM guy as long as what you were interested in, had this sort of imprimatur of his father, right, who he sort of worshipped. So yeah, like you said, he was 15 when May 4th. He was born in 04, and he was born in Kaifeng in Henan, or he was actually not born in Kaifeng. He was born in this little town called Jiangdianjie. It's now called Jiangdianxiang. It's an amazingly poor place. I have been there. It's kind of, if you drew kind of a triangle between the cities of Xuchang, Pingdingshan, and and Nanchang, or no, not Nanchang, and what's that city in southern Henan called?
Nanyang.
Nanyang, exactly. Good. It's like plop in the middle of there. So it's on the banks of the Luohe River, and yeah, he was from this illiterate heritage. I mean, one of his uncles, the oldest of his paternal uncles, was literate, but his father wasn't. He was born to the third son, and he was just he was really lucky because he was the first male born in that generation and was precocious, so they educated him. He was meant to take the civil service exams, the Kujie exams, and had a private tutor and everything. Was sent off to study in Kaifeng, and ended up going to Tsinghua, getting his master's degree there, and then joined the Northern Expedition, and ended up attaching himself to the left wing of the Kuomintang pretty early on. And during the war, he went inland with the university, and was among other things, quite a close confidant of people like Dai Li. Not a proud thing to brag about or anything, but knew Jiang Jieshi well, and worked. He was the personal tutor for Jiang Jingguo, so just a pretty remarkable life. But he was an absolute bookworm. He was incapable of sustaining himself. He was just so bookish, sort of, sickly, kind of always moved slowly, was always lost in thought. My grandmother had to really just sort of take care of every detail of his life. He'd forget to eat otherwise. And my memories of him were when he was in Columbia. He's living on Riverside Avenue right by Grant's tomb, and we'd go there every other weekend and spend the weekend with them. And just he would regale me with stories about Three Kingdoms and tell me, he's always telling me about our putative ancestor, the Tang general Guo Ziyi. And yeah, it was great. I mean, he connected me with history in a really profound way. And right now I'm actually translating his book, his last book, the book that he wrote before he died, which is, an outline history of modern China. Um, I'm going to be shopping that hopefully to a university press, and if I can find time outside of writing my damn Substack and doing the show, if I can make more headway. I'm like less than a chapter into it, but it's great.
Well, you were only 9 when he passed away,
Yeah, yeah.
but he still had that big impact on you.
He did. He absolutely did. I mean, he was just this sort of object of veneration around my house. And of course, my grandmother lived all the way up until 94. And, she was in Beijing. And I saw, I lived with her for many years. And yeah, so she talked to me all the time about him, about his work, about, his personal habits, about his dereliction of familial duty. And of course, my father talked constantly about him.
Do you listen to any history podcasts, or you have time to do that in your busy schedule? Anything good out there?
Oh yeah, there's this one called the China History Podcast, which is pretty cool. Yeah, the host is kind of a dork, but
Yeah, yeah. What a imposter.
I love your show so much. It's such a fantastic resource that you've put out there, and I mean I am indebted to you. It's so wonderful. But honestly, I don't listen to too much these days. Revolutions, I used to really dig that one. It's been a while since I listened to it regularly. These days when I have, I'm going to walk the dog or whatever, often I'll just listen to a history audiobook. I mean, I have, for example, that entire Story of Civilization, Will Durant, and then later Will and Ariel Durant on audiobook. And so, you pop that in anywhere at any moment, and it's just gonna, just draw you right in. And then I'll listen to tons of history audiobooks and podcasts. Not so much. I mean, honestly, when I plop down at the end of the day in front of the TV and I turn on my, Google TV, it's always got some new thing to recommend to me, some YouTube video, because we're in this age of just embarrassing. I mean, the embarrassment of YouTube historical riches, right? So many of these guys have just poured their hearts into creating these videos, and the history stands up. It's really good. There's a lot of China stuff. I'm really into Central Asia, so I've been watching this long series about the Turks. Everything all the way going back to the Xiongnu and the Avars. The Ranran and the Gok Turks and all that stuff. And yeah, that's a lot of fun. So YouTube stuff, I wish that were around when I was in college. Damn.
Yeah, I wish a lot of stuff was around when we were in college. But yeah, it's funny. Never has more information been available, and never have we been more ignorant. Not me and you,
Yeah.
or our listeners.
I mean, I still feel ignorant because of all that stuff out there, right? I mean, it's just, I'm reminded every day of how many gigantic holes there are in my knowledge. So, yeah.
So, yeah, any writers you could recommend, who are putting out great China historical fiction? When I was young in the 70s and 80s, I was starved of this genre. Whatever was published, no matter how awful it was pretty bad back then. I read everything. And, like it is with China news and analysis, there's so much available now in China historical fiction. Do you have your finger on this pulse at all? Do you who's good out there?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a friend of mine who I knew in Beijing some years and years ago, a guy named Scott Crawford. He lives in Taiwan now. He has a great book. It's called Silk Road Centurion. It's about a Roman centurion. He gets captured and sold into slavery fighting in the Parthian Wars. And he gets sold to Xiongnu traders and then brought into Western China, like into Gansu area. And so it's a Roman guy in China. A lot of these have to hang it on a white guy, right? It's I guess one that I really, really dig. It's not strictly speaking historical fiction because he introduces elements of magic and then changes the names of places, but it's very clear. You know the author Guy Gavriel Kay? This guy, he's written a bunch of stuff, and he's probably most famous for having been really the ghostwriter of the Silmarillion. So he's a magisterial fantasy author. So his shtick, I think it may be unkind to call it a shtick. His whole approach is to fictionalize historical settings like the Iberian Peninsula, Spain in the time of El Cid, right, which is like what 9th, 10th century. There's a book called The Lions of Al Rasan that takes place there, where a guy who is El Cid is one of the characters. The Albigensian Crusade, in Languedoc in southern France, which is the setting of a book called A Song for Arbonne. But the China stuff he did is really, really, really great. One's called All Under Heaven, and the other's called River of Stars. So All Under Heaven is actually just in Tang, China, in the years following the Battle of Talas in like 751 through the Anlushan Rebellion. And so it's populated by characters like, Li Bai, the poet, who's called, the banished immortal through it. Yang Guozhong and Yang Guifei and, Tang Bi Huang. All sorts of characters are in this book, and they're recognizable. And it's a fairly faithful retelling of, the mid-century, mid-8th century rebellion. Really fascinating and very, very well written. And then the follow-up to that, it's in the same series. It takes place actually hundreds of years later. It's basically the UFA story combined with the water margin with Shui Zhuai, which is a very cool thing. So it takes place, in northern Song during the time of the Jurchen invasion. It actually starts just before, it's when like the Jurchen alliance with northern Song against the Qidan, against the Khitans, the Liao dynasty happens, and how poorly that goes off, and then leads to that whole disaster of 1125. But fascinating, really great stuff. It's the poetry is good, the characters are faithfully drawn, and the action and adventure is it's first rate. So yeah, Guy Gavriel Kay. The Lions of Al Rasan is the first one that I read, which was really good. But these two on China, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a historical fiction is really a fabulous gateway to learning
Oh,
about,
totally.
China history in general. I think the historical fiction really does it. I wish more of it was,
Yeah.
made more accessible. Some people just don't read. I've been talking, with I'm friendly with Janie Chang, or Janie. She probably goes by Janie Chang, Chang. But yeah, she's written a lot of books, and we've been going back and forth about, hey, you should come on the
Uh-huh,
show, and
uh-huh.
we should get a bunch of historical fiction writers, about China, and yeah. So I'm gonna contact her again and say, come on, let's do it.
Yeah.
I was just chatting with Graham in Shanghai, and he sends his regards, by the way. And I said, "Yeah, what about your Alice Poon? I should have her on the show too." So I'm gonna do that. I think that would be a great show. I
Yeah.
think historical fiction really can do a lot of great things.
Oh, yeah. Totally, totally.
What events or periods in Chinese history might make great movies? It's been what about 8 years now since Zhang Yimou's The Great Wall, and all the radioactivity from that bomb is mostly dissipated, I think.
That's got a pretty long half-life.
If Hollywood wanted to give it another go, what China historical events were made for the movies? And it can't be Redcliffe, because John Woo already did that.
Man, that's a good question. I mean, part of me wants to say, like, what wouldn't make a great movie, right? I mean, I guess I'm kind of partial to the Tang Dynasty, so I would love to see one just on the life of Li Shimin, that actually, like, brings the Turkic elements into it, has him riding and doing horse archery and speaking to the Gok Turks in their own language, and killing his brothers, his famous fratricide, and just being the badass that he was. There have been really good TV shows of late that I've seen that, at least in terms of the aesthetic, are really, really imaginative. Like on Empress Wu, there was that kind of Chinese ripoff of 24 that was set in Chang'an. It was like I can't remember what it was called. In the Tong, that was aesthetically very, very cool. I'd like to see some that are done for early Tong, but what I guess what I hate when they do Chinese that's too modern sounding in these costume dramas. It's like anachronistic, and then they use like electronic music. I mean, I can't stand that anachronism. I feel like, God, just do it right. You can exercise a lot of imagination. I guess I'd love to see a movie also on the fall of the Ming, right? I mean, you'd have like Li Zicheng and that depraved monster Zhang Xianzhong, right? In Sichuan massacres and stuff. Wu Gui, and you have the whole drama of the Manchus come through the wall and taking Beijing, and that would be pretty epic. I think it would be kind of sweeping and epic and very bad. It'd be great. I mean, bad in the good sense.
Yeah, there's so many great periods that would just make really fantastic movies. I just hope not another Great Wall.
Yeah, no, I don't know if did you see the latest Zhang Yimou movie?
I didn't.
It's actually, I thought it was pretty good. Yeah, it's called Manjiang Hong. It takes place like 4 years after Yue Fei's death, and it takes place in the mansion of Qin Hui or whatever. I never know how his name's
everybody seems to go Qin Hui. So I've been going. I just did for the Chinese sayings podcast. I just featured Dong Chuang Shi Fa, which is a great Qin Hui story attached to it. Yeah, he never goes out of style.
Yeah, no, I've spat on his statue. I mean, Hangzhou, I've done it.
Me too. Even though the sign said "Don't do it," but I did it anyway.
Right, which means do it. It's China. So I actually think it's really good. There's the actor. I can't remember his name right now. He's a comic actor, and I described it to my wife. It's like this would be like if he's like the love child of Zhang Wen and Ge You. He's just got that kind of really kind of lazy, drawly, funny, like laconic, but also ironic cadence to his speech, and just a really good physical actor. It's a murder mystery set in Qin Hui's palace. It's pretty good. I totally recommend it. Better than a lot of the other shit that Zhang Yimou has put out recently.
Is it streaming anywhere, or where can I get it?
I saw it on some obscure. I mean, if you just look it up, you can find it, and there's no commercials. It's free. You just have to kind of look for it. I just found it on my computer, and then just Google Chromecast it over to my TV. It's great. Yeah.
So what do you got planned as far as your direction in the coming years? Anything big on the horizon, or are you like Laszlo Montgomery and just make things up as you go along?
I'm pretty much by the seat of my pants. No, I mean, I've got some big ideas. I think that maybe one day, maybe book worthy. One of those, I guess you'll see a preview of it in the essay that I'm publishing this week on my Substack. I mean, that Substack is just, how these things are. It's a hungry beast, and it's just a lot of work just to keep up each week with, a new essay and a new podcast. And then I'm editing a lot of the other work, right? There's Jay Carter's This Week in Chinese History, Paul French's Ultimate China Bookshelf, Andrew Methin's Chinese Phrase of the Week. It's all on there now. Hopefully we'll get something from Laszlo Montgomery and Teacup Media and spread the word there too. Never
know.
But yeah. Anyway, the thing that I'm doing when I have some free time is I'm working on this translation of my grandfather's book that I mentioned. It's in this really dense kind of quasi-classical style, so it's pretty challenging to translate. So it's a slog.
Wow! Why don't you just call Brendan O'Kane or somebody?
Because I want to do it, right? I want to do it. Yeah, that guy's an amazing translator. I'm sure I'll enlist him in some capacity.
So, I have to ask: do you think there's any hope for the future of friendly US PRC relations? And are we worse off today than, when Nixon went to China in 72? What what would it take to upright the bombed out sinking ship of good relations?
Well, I mean, we're not worse off than we were, on the eve of the Nixon visit, right? This is still, I mean, we have the ballast of this enormous trade. I mean, it's not the same thing as the Cold War. I mean, what did we ever buy from the Russians? Occasionally, a bottle of Stoli or, Kalashnikovs for, uh, our gangs or whatever. But no, we buy tickets to the Bolshoi, I guess, when they come through town. But yeah, we didn't buy anything from the Russians, so it's different. I never give up hope. I mean, I'm eternally optimistic, but I am kind of holding out for the alien invasion that will unite us in defense of humanity.
Yeah, that's a fantasy.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty grim. Yeah, it's grim. And, it's going to get worse before November, like I said, because we're really just going to head right into silly season for a while. I really hope that China is sort of sophisticated enough to get like how our politics affect the way. I mean, I was just talking the other day about this new executive action by Biden about Chinese, quote unquote, smart car imports, right? And how in the announcement he doesn't even mention the automaker, the American automaker with the biggest market cap. He only talks about the big three, however relevant they are, right? And I said, if I could just like grab the foreign minister and Wang Yi and I just say, listen, you see what this is about, right? This is because Biden, saw so many defections of once loyal Arab American voters in Michigan. And to make up for them, because they're pissed off about Gaza, totally understandably. And so they basically didn't vote, or they voted, a protest vote in the primary. And he's worried because if we lose Michigan, if the Democrats lose Michigan, we're kind of toast. So he's got to, get the UAW on board. And how do you do that? You wave the kind of protectionist banner. You go after China. And I hope they understand that's what that was done for, right? And so you trot out, the otherwise very sensible Gina Raimondo to talk about the national security threat posed by, these Chinese, automobiles. It's like, okay, all our smartphones are made in China. Why aren't we worrying about that? Everyone's spending 3-4 hours a day on TikTok. You're really worried that these cars are going to collect data and send it back to China? That's the thing. And so you got to ban them. It's like, also, I thought we were all about, the decarbonization, right? Don't you want electric vehicles? They basically didn't mention electric vehicles either in that announcement. So I just want to tell them, look, can you just not overreact to this yet? Wait until November.
Voters want overreaction.
So it goes.
Yeah. So when are you next coming to Southern Cali? Any events planned that might bring you to this land, to this part of town?
Let's plan one. I mean, you have the biggest audience, as far as I know, by far, in the world of China-related podcasts. So how's about we do a live show together somewhere in SoCal, maybe at UCLA? I can talk to Michael Barry. He runs their China Center. He can maybe help us set something like that up. And I'll turn the tables and interview you in front of an audience.
Don't ask me anything about Chinese history. No.
Oh, no. I'm going to. No, it would be totally great, right? We could do that. I would be really up for doing a live event out there. Get out to Southern California. So many friends out there, including you. I'd love to revisit the place. I haven't been for a while.
Well, come on out.
Let's do it then. I'll get the wheels in motion.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, absolutely, Laszlo.
Well, this was fun. Talking about history is so much less incendiary than discussing current affairs and news and politics. So thanks for coming on to chit-chat about Chinese history. And also, thanks for all those years of Seneca and the public service you and Jeremy do and have done all these years.
Yeah, wish Jeremy was still a part of it, but, he's moving on to other things, so it's just going to be me now. But, I will have him back on as much as he can manage. But yeah, miss him.
Good guy.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Kaiser Kuo. So I want to thank Kaiser once again and everyone else who tuned in and lasted this far. This is Laszlo Montgomery signing off from Shaky Town here in the state of confusion, inviting you to come back once more with feeling for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.